Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Miss Sheehan, it's a pleasure to have you on my show. Can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Okay, I'm not sure how much to say initially. My name is Helena Sheehan. I grew up in the USA, but I've lived in Ireland for the past 50 years. I'm an emeritus professor at Dublin City University. I've been active on the left my whole adult life, although I definitely did not begin that way.
What caused you to, become more active on the left in your adult life compared to when you started?
Well, I grew up in Cold War America. Um, I believed the whole narrative that America was the greatest country in the history of the world, and communists were not only the political enemy, but they were a kind of cosmological, ontological evil. I mean, I believed, and millions of other people my age believed, that the communists were wanted to take over the world, turn it into some kind of prison camp, that they would even kind of imagine sometimes they would burst into my bedroom and made me denounce my country and my parents and my religion. I grew up like that, and my parents didn't belong to some kind of cult. They were normal working class Catholics, and that's what millions of people in America in the 1950s believed. And so I grew up as a normal child believing that. However, I was a rather thinking child, and I asked questions quietly at first, just trying to figure things out for myself because I perceived that my parents, my teachers, the people around me just believed what they were taught to believe. And there are a lot of other people in the world maybe that believe something else. So why should I believe something just because my parents believed it or my teachers believed it? So initially, what happened was that I just sought out a more intellectual version of the same thing. I kind of latched on to Jesuits who seemed to be more educated and rigorous. And I used to go to the courthouse and hang around the criminal courts and talk to judges and lawyers. Nobody in my family ever did anything like this, or nobody in my school. But like I was searching. I became involved in politics. I became involved in the Democratic Party. I worked for the election of JFK in 1960. I got severely punished for it. Um,
Why'd you get punished?
well, my parents were, they just thought politics is for other people. Just stay quiet and don't don't attract attention. Um, I was punished technically because I played hooky from school. I was just so into it. I just couldn't stand sitting in a classroom listening to nuns when I wanted to go out in the world and learn what I needed to learn. So I was rather severely punished for that. I'm not sorry I did it. And I continued that way. Yeah.
When it comes to Kennedy, though, did you look at any of his speeches that he was making? Like, what were your thoughts on this kind of young guy coming to power a little bit?
Well, I was 16 and 15, 16 when I got involved, in the Kennedy campaign. I used to write letters to US senators with my views about this and that, like I understood anything, but I was seeking to understand. I even took a train down to Washington and went into Kennedy's office, and his staffers treated me very, very indulgently, I have to say. And I used to, write letters. My parents kept these letters for years from back and forth between myself, and they were signed by Kennedy, but some staffer probably wrote them. I met him once on the steps of the courthouse in Upper Darby. Pennsylvania during the 1960s election. Shook my hand for a second, um, and so I was quite caught up in the Kennedy campaign. I mean, looking back on it now, he didn't really stand for anything that was drastically different than the whole worldview I grew up believing. But he was kind of more energetic, more alive. Uh, it just there was just more of an energy and intelligence to it.
He said things today that seemed normal, but back then it was kind of revolutionary in a sense. I've listened to his debates versus Richard Nixon, and he's talking about the economy, he's talking about civil rights, he's talking about America used to be great a couple generations ago, but the generation or the people today wouldn't recognize the generation from 2 decades ago. Now, how much of that was exposed compared to the knowledge we know now with a 60 years something of document releases and information? You start to see the FBI invading Hollywood looking for communists. And I reached out to you to talk about Marxism, but this whole thing is like, I don't side politically with anything. I'll just put that right up front. I don't believe in a left or right. Honestly, if you ask me what my opinions were, I'd probably say there's a deep state, mostly just because I believe government
It's a deep
officials and
state, by the way.
but that's my whole thing is like when we talk about who elects who and it's 4 years in office and you don't really see a whole lot of change happening. I go, because there's a structured system. And sadly, we're in place with business. It's a capitalist structure and all these things are funded. So if you try and make one change, it messes up a whole slew of business. Nobody's going to let you mess with their business. But that gets labeled a conspiracy. That's fine. Um, but it's caused me to kind of look and understand more about Marxism, understand more about communists, understand more about other religions and things that it seems like have been broad brushed for a very long time as being bad or evil or corrupt. And I'm like, well, why are we thinking this way? It's just because, and everyone goes, well, that's how it's always been. It's like, has it always been that way? I mean, does anybody think to ask the question why? And then we start diving into it and realize that there might be some injustices and some, you know, bandwagon blaming or something like that that makes us think a certain way about something. And I don't like preconceived notions.
Yeah, well, we grew up at that time with a lot of preconceived notions, and I did become aware in my teens of blatant injustices, particularly around the issues raised by the civil rights movement. I was very enthusiastic about the civil rights movement, and that's one reason why for a while after 1960, I supported Kennedy and then Johnson. I supported the whole idea of the new frontier, though I was only a teenager. I didn't understand it very well. And then the new society under Johnson, and I was a liberal. But as the years would go on, I would develop a Marxist critique of liberalism, because liberalism is only a bit of gloss on capitalism, and it's the capitalist mode of production, which is the structural problem, creating all of the injustices that I saw unfolding around me. And of course, the Vietnam War was a very big factor with my generation. What was the US doing in Vietnam? What were these poor peasant people doing that they should be, that their villages should have been destroyed, and or if their villages weren't destroyed, they should be maimed for their whole life. It was just horrendous. So that just opened my eyes to the systemic nature, of all these injustices. That it wasn't just some white people being cruel to some black people. It wasn't just it wasn't the U.S. going into Vietnam just to save the world from this evil that was communism. And even when I first started protesting against the Vietnam War, it was just that it was an unjust war. But that didn't necessarily mean that I was for communism. And it shocked me, on the first big demos that I went to in Washington, that people were carrying the NLF flags and saying, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win. But then, within a few years and learning a lot more about it, I thought the NLF did deserve to win. I actually was on the side of the enemy, which kind of shocked me, growing up the way I did. I would never imagine myself thinking that, even when I first went to demonstrations against the Vietnam War. And then we also grew up with this whole idea of this iron curtain. I think when I was a child, I actually thought there was literally a curtain of iron. Um, but I I came and, for a lot of reasons, I came and I lived in Europe and I crossed over from Western Europe to Eastern Europe. I lived for a time behind that so-called Iron Curtain, and I saw things from the other side, and I changed sides. Um, and if anybody had ever told me as a child that would happen, I could nobody could have been more shocked.
Did you realize that like kind of over here, or at least in the States, you were getting stuck in like what I would call an echo chamber? It's like one of the things I started realizing, I guess, talking to people with various perspectives and things is that like obviously you can sit and agree with the side you agree with the most, but if you don't try and understand the other side, you don't really get it. And I always wondered why other countries, I would say, had a different perspective of the United States compared to how we viewed it. And if you look back then, I mean, everything was blaming communism as the enemy and there's a whole irrational fear that was kind of built up. But then once you kind of branched out from it, you realize that fear was just created, and these people were just stuck in this bubble. I would say, like once they got the information, that's what the independent press was trying to do for the longest time was shout out that message, talk about the injustices. But the main narrative was we have to go to war in Vietnam. Why? I don't know. We're just going, and it's a good thing. I'm like, okay, and then you just nod your head and kind of continue with it.
Well, that broke down on a pretty massive scale in the 1960s. I mean, it began with civil rights, then with the Vietnam War, then questioning gender roles. Why should women stay at home and men go out to work? I never, even as a young girl, I found that very hard um, to think that's what I would. I never thought that's what I would ever do. I was never going to be my mother. I mean, I became a teacher nun because they were the only women in my world that were out there doing something bigger than the work of the private home. But the thing is, the atmosphere in the 60s, and this is on a mass scale, it was to question everything, not just what was going on in the South with civil rights notes, not just why was the US in Vietnam, everything. Why should women be at home and men go out to everything? This just opened up everything, and all of the basic presuppositions that we accepted growing up without questioning, they were up for grabs. And like we talked far into the night, raising questions about absolutely everything. It was an electrifying atmosphere, and it changed me and many people forever. Some people, maybe they were into it in a more superficial way, and they just slipped back and they led the same kind of lives as their parents. After it was a bit of useful fun, and they got more into the dope scene than the politics scene. Some of them, but but for those of us that were serious about it, it lasted a whole lifetime. I was changed forever by that atmosphere. And I was very active in the US New Left in the late 60s and early 70s.
When did the impact, I guess, start? When did you really start to experience at least a comfortability in the aspects of talking about the way you wanted to change things or the problems that you wanted to raise that you felt like should be addressed, like the Vietnam War, like civil rights? I mean, I feel like back then, a lot of people were either going with what was going on because they just didn't know, or there was just a silence aspect that was, nobody questioned the government. I think probably that we do it more now. But
Oh,
back
well,
then,
we did radically then. We
well, I
did
mean,
radically
the
then.
overall
And like
general
for
public.
somebody that supported Lyndon Johnson when he became president, by the time he finished, like I was on the streets with people, hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?
You didn't like it when he grew his hair all out and everything?
Um, so um, it, it was really very drastic. It was very, very drastic, the whole atmosphere in the country at that time. I know the country is very divided now, but it's on completely different lines. Um, there was a right and a center and a left, and now it's like between this neoliberal center and far right, and I'm not there. I'm on another spectrum. And I find the whole atmosphere in the country now extremely alienating. And also, one of the things that helped me, I mean, there was all that questioning when I still lived there, and stimulated by the whole New Left. But I've lived out of the country for 50 years. And believe me, when you leave a country, and go look at it from the outside, you see things in sharper relief. So for 50 years, I've been looking at the US from Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and even for intervals from Southern Africa. And it looks very different from these places. It really and truly does. And I think I see it more clearly. Now, I don't have the same, close-up knowledge of people that are into it nitty-gritty of, the midterm elections. And, I mean, I'm informed about it, but like, I'm not into the nitty-gritty of who's running here and there. I don't, in this district and that district, but like, I see the whole of it much more clearly than the people that are real up close, not seeing the wood for the trees.
Well, could you explain like the Marxist view when you pick that up? I know when it started and kind of a little bit about the history, but I just don't know when, like what it fully entails, and also when it started to become at least a little bit more normal. I mean, the way I'm reading across it in documents, especially, like I said, everything would be related. I've been stuck in the time period of the 60s and 70s. I think the farthest I've branched out is maybe the end of Nixon's administration, but it is this word that gets mentioned, which it seemed like if you were reading the Bible and you read the word Satan. Like I don't, I just, I'm trying to understand it more to be able to grasp what it is and understand maybe the capacity of what the fear was of it back then.
When when I first got involved in the New Left, I didn't see myself as becoming a Marxist or a communist. You can be left, I was at first a liberal, then I was a more radical liberal. And but the thing is that once I started seeing all of these things as in these injustices interconnected, and I've always had a tendency to think systemically. I always had this feeling, even when I was a child, that there were a lot of people, running around, forgetting to think where they were going. I always wanted to see the big picture. I always wanted to go deeper and wider, to
Deep state,
understand. To what?
deep state, deep state.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be yeah, that would be one of the things. Yeah, deep state. That, okay, you could. And what did it mean to decide to vote, Democrat or Republican? Okay, I could list the differences. And when I did vote, for the first time, you had to be 21 when I was young to vote. I voted Democrat, but like the Democratic Party just, I was very alienated from it very soon because there's a whole structure there. And it's not just the deep state, it's capitalism. It's bigger than the state, but it's capitalism as a global system that has a strong grip on the state, no matter who's elected, this time or that time or the other time. Yes, it makes some kind of difference, um, but not much. And so that's what I meant by thinking systemically. Not even so much the deep state, but the system that controls the deep state. That's what Marxism opened up to me.
Whenever I mention deep state, usually people think I'm thinking like cloaks and stuff. I don't think that. What I think is just a system that's set up to care more about the financial than it does the personal situations. Like obviously, we have things on personal perspectives when it comes to Medicare and things like that that could have improvements. But when you look at the things, the wealthy keep getting more wealthy. There's a top elite
But
percent.
capitalism.
Yeah, that's what I mean by deep state is just when you see something happen, if you look at the big picture, who's getting more money off of that and what's the business incentive? And that's what you'll see why we're making the decisions that we're making. It's not necessarily for your gain, it's for the global whoever's getting the pocket. That's not Marxism, is it?
Um, it's it's on the way to it.
Okay.
A bit more to Marxism than that, but like it's going in that direction. Yeah.
So what entails in Marxism? Could you explain just a little bit, like a couple characteristics or something for me?
Well, it's first of all, it's a theory about capitalism as a mode of production. First of all, it's a whole theory of history about how capitalism evolved from, a more primitive society, through a more sophisticated ancient society, through feudalism to the different stages of capitalism, and how capitalism, created advanced industry in the working class, and the working class is meant to be the gravedigger of capitalism. Not that it's quite happened, um, but a theory about capitalism as a mode of production, where the market is prioritized over all other social ties. So it's not the market as such which is evil. I mean, it's not buying and selling, which itself is evil, because it's not. I mean, we have a more advanced society because not everybody, has to grow every bit of food they eat or build their own house or, their own clothes that they wear. So we have a division of labor and, money and, buying and selling is, allows you to have advanced science and technology and good universities and all this, the social division of labor. The problem with capital is not the market as such, but that the market is prioritized over all other social ties. That profitability in the marketplace is the key determinant of everything else. Everything else has to fall into place around it. And capitalism has become dominant not only in um, uh, the means of anything that's been produced that's on any big scale. Take Amazon, not the rainforest, the company. Um, it's been created by centuries, decades, even in some sense, centuries of social labor. Okay, it's a relatively new company, but what it started out selling books. So, first of all, there's, all of the people who cultivated the forest, to create the paper of those books, authors like me that wrote books, editors and publishing houses, people that, drove delivery vans, worked in warehouses, that kind of thing. So, the value of Amazon is created is a product of social labor. So why should one person be able to own that? Okay, entrepreneurial skill is a form of labor, but why should it be so disproportionately rewarded um, in relation to the labor of all these other people? So it's a massively unjust control of production and distribution of wealth.
Well, I would ask the question, why do they say we don't have monopolies in society? But obviously, there's some damn monopolies. Amazon started selling off books, and now they reached out to this, and they all bank on convenience. I don't get it. It's like, I think
And it is convenient.
that's the thing is like I think trading is fine. I think buying and selling is obviously it's okay. But I think there's a fair kind of trade in a sense. But what we have now is that there's a mass scale market of producing things and then jacking up those prices, even though you can make it at half the cost, and then causing the person. I mean, it's return on investment, but it sucks if you're an individual and you're not a part of like a certain class. I mean, I think the middle class has dropped down to poor. The poor are still poor, but even poorer than that, at least 10 years ago it was. I mean, it's hard to watch that. And then what I don't like is that people go, well, it's this president or it's this president. I'm like, it's not that. It's the business that's been building for
It's
25 years.
capitalism,
Oh, shit.
the system.
I,
That's what it is. And that's a bigger problem, of course. The scale of the problem is vast when you think about it that way.
I just picture a
So
Monopoly man with like a monocle and like a capitalism.
yeah, I remember playing Monopoly. But that's what it is. So it's a theory about capitalism as a system. And it's also a theory about socialism as an alternative system, where the means of social production are socially owned, not privately owned. And decisions about what's produced, how it's produced, and how what's produced is distributed is made by a greater collective, basically the state, which is the collective body of people.
Could I have an example?
An example.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we've had a number of experiments in socialism. I lived in the Soviet Union for a time doing research about Marxism. It was a society where the expropriators had been expropriated. There were no oligarchs. There were no there were no large scale enterprises that were owned by any one person or small group. They were owned by the Soviet people. Farms were, were collective farms. Um, I mean, it was full of imperfections. Don't get me wrong, but but social wealth was roughly distributed more equitably. There were no very poor people. There were no very rich people. Now, there were people that, occupied certain positions and had access to, certain goods and maybe slightly better houses. But compared to the disparity of wealth within capitalism, like that, as opposed to that, the scale of it was vastly different. And like the argument was that, oh, well, if somebody was, general secretary of the Communist Party, maybe they needed a lot more, space and, a dacha um, get away from the office every so often. But they didn't own these things. They didn't own anything. Khrushchev, Gorbachev, Brezhnev, they didn't own even a house or a dacha or a car or anything. These things were collectively owned. Look at Cuba, which is a society where everything is more equitably distributed. It's people are relatively poor. Everybody is relatively poor, um, and um, and a lot of that is because of the U.S. blockade, rather than the fact that socialism doesn't have the capacity to be an efficient mode of production. But Cuba has been severely um, um,
I don't
limited by the blockade.
I don't rationalize Castro for, yeah, I know people said that, oh, we needed to take him out. I'm like, I guess there's perspectives on both sides of that, but I'm like, can you blame a man for just wanting
Kennedy was up to here in that.
um well, he made backdoor channels, and the assassination attempts on Castro weren't actually Kennedy's. That was from Eisenhower's administration, but Kennedy gets the blame for it. I have documents to prove that Robert Kennedy even fought that. But a lot Castro wanted to reclaim Cuba and make it his, and he wanted to kick the government
He
out
wanted
and
to
knock
make
it
it
out.
the Cuban people's.
Yeah, so I mean, you can understand that. I mean, that's where I say there's like two perspectives on the whole thing, but like there's a weird thing even today that I've had to question on my own, which is the fact of owning, like people like their own land, they like to have their name on something, and then at the same time, I talked to a guy who's part of this voluntary human extinction movement. I swear to you, it's a real thing, which is just don't have kids, save the planet, stop having kids. We need to reduce the population. And I had to think about that. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, you're brainwashed to think that you want to have this Western idea of a family and 4 or 5 different kids. And it just had me looking at it different, where I was like, I mean, yeah, people should be up to their own choice whether they want to have kids or not. I mean, everything kind of tells you in society, especially growing up, you're going to go to college, get an education, get a degree. That doesn't do anything for you anymore. And then you just get into this area of like, okay, so how do you question something or ask something and be able to understand the information, be able to process it? And you got to go to multiple sources. You got to talk to a bunch of people. You got to communicate. I mean, I think everybody's got a different, I don't know. I fall, like I said, I fall isolationist on all the political stuff. I mean, I try and understand everybody's perspective on it. But if you ask me to make a clear decision on, what I would side with, I was like, I don't trust any of it. I think everybody's got their goods and bads. I was thinking I was a Marxist a minute ago until, I mean, I get where Lee Harvey got it from now, was from going to Russia. It must be something that's from over there. And you have to think, okay, you're coming back to America. That's not going to be the viewpoint over here. And that culture, trying to create that there, the government wanted to squash out anything that was different than what they were creating in their little bubble. And I see documentation to prove that. And people can say, oh, that's, you're thinking about it from the other side's perspective. I'm like, well, how else are you going to view something? You can't view something if you choose that you're on a side. And I believe to stay impartial and to look at it with an open mind, you can't be left or right. You just kind of have to view it as, here's both perspectives of this. Which one seems more ethically right to you? And then that's kind of where I've been going.
Okay, I agree with you about looking at listening, looking at things from multiple perspectives. I don't agree with you about not taking sides and being impartial. I mean, I've spent my life, I mean, I really do did, especially when I was young, look at many alternative perspectives. But like, they're not equally right. Sometimes, a certain perspective can be persuasive. It can say, yes, this is the best possible perspective to see this. I'll commit myself to that. I mean, I've committed myself to Marxism. I still have an open mind about it. There's still a lot within Marxism that needs to be, worked out, and it's an open-ended thing. I don't think that, I've just, taken a book by Marx off the shelf. Now that's what I think. I don't have to think anymore. It's not like that. But like, when it comes to right and left, I've made my decision.
That's fine.
I'm on the left. Why? Because I was seeking truth, and this is where I found it.
I
I don't
think,
agree with everybody else on the left
yeah.
about everything. I mean, the left argues about most things most of the time,
I
you know.
find problems on the left and right. I also find problem with the discussion when you ask someone who they vote for, and they're like, "I chose the lesser of two evils." I'm like, "Why don't you just vote independent?" Like Jesus, like we're doing this two-party system over and over again, and whenever someone gives you the answer, they say, "Oh, they'll never win." I'm like, "How do you know if you don't freaking try?"
Well, that system is set your electoral system is set up to be like that. It is very hard, I mean, I think that, it's a good case voting for, third-party candidates in various elections. But, like, there is always the lesser evil argument, and the more evil is always so bloody evil that it pulls you that way. Europe isn't like that. Africa isn't like that. We have a multi-party system, a real multi-party system, where it's not just this one or that one. We have a much fuller spectrum. We have, radical leftists in our national parliament in Ireland. Took us a long time to get that, but like that's important. There are many other things that are important to do, but it would be much harder to do that there.
I think there's extremes on both sides. Like when I started looking into Timothy Leary and people talked about the Weather Underground, whether they were doing things for social change. I mean, an accidental death could happen with one of the bombs that they had, so I had to understand that. But then you look at the other side. I mean, if you're at a college campus and the CIA is infiltrating there and they're using people for their own advantage in military or to gain intelligence information during the Cold War, they created a fake magazine called The Rational Observer. I have faults on both sides with the activism aspect and also the fact that we're allowing this on college institutions. The thing is where I say I don't choose a side, I should probably clarify is the fact that I don't let it stop the conversation. I kind of want to like if you're willing to talk to someone from an opposite side of yours or just be able to enhance that discussion without getting into a debate. I think that whole platform of how we label things debates is so bad. I just go, I mean, what do you got people talking over each other, shouting, and they're just insulting each other. I mean, whatever that to me, that's a show. It's Jersey
Yeah,
Shore. I'm like,
yeah, yeah.
if you want to talk about ideas, an exchange of ideas comes from a foundation of conversation, a thing of sharing. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree with me. It just means you understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I mean, back to the 60s, and I thought Timothy Leary talked a lot of nonsense.
He did.
I thought I was against the Weather Underground, but mind you, I admired them in a way. I think that they were true believers. They really were, trying to make a better world. I don't think you do that by bombing people. Mostly they bomb themselves.
Yeah.
Um, but it's it's just not all equal. The left has been the left puts forward a worldview that, on the whole, is more credible, it's more comprehensive, it's more credible, it's more grounded than anything else on the horizon. I mean, I scrutinize it, constantly. I defend it in public constantly. And I just think that, you seek the truth and sometimes you find it. Not whole, not in a tidy package, but you find a path, maybe. Not so much a finished thing, but you find a path. You find a way to map everything in relation to everything else. And I think this has been, the biggest thing in my life in that sense. There was a couple of years ago. There were students on my campus doing a vox pop, Um, and they put a microphone in front of me and they said, "What's the most important thing you've, learned from your life?" And like I was walking around thinking of something more practical, but I thought the importance of having a worldview. And they looked at me like, "That's odd. That's very different from all the other answers we got." I said, "What were all the other answers?" They said, "Oh, mostly about drink." Um, but I want to see university, so
I would have said the longest time, I probably would have avoided the left for a very long time just because I always felt like I was being talked down to whenever we talked about conversational ideas about things. But then I never agreed with the right either. Like there's sometimes I'm agreeing with someone in a conversation and they go to complete 1984 George Orwell or world control order. I'm like, nope, this is where I tap out. Like, Jesus, can we just find a happy medium? And then I started to understand more about the history that goes on with the left and a little bit of suppression aspect. So I'm like, even with the Weather Underground, bombing innocent people isn't good, but also trying to throw a rock at a giant brick wall that is literally stopping any other dissenting voices or anything that didn't have the official narrative or opinion. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover, I've seen the photos of him in a dress. The mob had photos of him in a dress, and that's why he never acknowledged them. And that gets labeled a conspiracy. I still didn't even validate it when I saw the photos, but he never acknowledged the mob, and he was looking for homosexuals. He was looking for so much thing. Maybe that was the times, and I'm trying to understand it with the perspective
it
I
was
have
the times.
now.
I mean, I was, the FBI. I was on the list of suspects for the media 1971. Do you remember that? Or do you know about that? You
I'm
weren't there,
freaking
obviously.
24. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, but like it's a famous case. The media FBI office was broken into.
Oh, the censorship office.
Yeah, yeah, and
Okay.
that's where the left discovered the whole COINTELPRO
Mockingbird and
program.
all that. Yeah.
So that was like people. I mean, I didn't actually do it. I'd have been proud if I had, by the way, but I didn't. And there were people I knew, and I was on the list of suspects, and that the FBI hounded over that.
Can I ask you just like it's probably different from your studies here, but I want to get your perspective on this. What do you think about the idea that there's always, whenever we try and do change or we meet someone that might have an opposing view, there's a reaction to want to change that. Is like a normalicity or normalization aspect to, I guess we like groups. I mean, you can see that on social media. There's writers guilds and there's all this, but they're private communities sometimes because the fear of trolls, people that'll break in and maybe be more hatred, which sucks is that we have to do that because there are people in our society that just want to cause chaos in a sense. But at the same time, I'm like, there is this like, if you don't agree with me, then I can try and change you. But then also there's a walk away. And I'm like, I don't there's a way to create like I mean, I have friends from all sides of the spectrum and friends that won't talk to each other, refuse to even be in the same podcast or anything because of their viewpoints are so in the Kennedy assassination specifically, but so detailed and so different. But they agree with most things, but it's that one little detail. And I'm like, well, we all agree. Let's stick with the main point, which is that we all agree in this, basis. And it's like, no, no. And then there's like back history. And I'm like, what there's a way to fix that or there's a way to do that. And I think when like the people are really strong, like you see the amazing change that goes on. I mean, in a matter of 10 years, 5 years, we could not recognize 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, and even more. And I'm like, there's a way to like just not just tweet about it. We can conversate about it. And I don't know if that's like I'm not trying to
Well, I
seem like
mean,
a
too,
preachy.
tweets are a conversation too. I quite like social media. I'm not sure,
Ah,
what Musk is going to do with
ban it
what he's going
forever.
to turn Twitter into, but I quite like Twitter and Facebook. I like social media. I do find real conversation more on Facebook. You can write something that's a wee bit longer, but like I find Twitter when there's a kind of running story and all of this, and the I like the immediacy of it, and I don't know what it's going to turn into, what might replace it. But I think generally my point is I think social media is a good thing. I mean, okay, it's not like the only way to interact. There's conversations that I have, running into people on campus or whatever. Um, but it extends the reach of conversation. I mean, because I live in Dublin, and like I can't really have that many conversations by other means with people in California or
I
Kuala
wouldn't have met
Lumpur.
you without the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I cut social media off. I only post once a day. I my life has increased happier. Mostly, I don't know if it's because of my news feed or I do follow various sides. So you see a whole. It's so much where your brain's like, I don't know where to go. I'm just going to take an Advil and relax. And at that point, it was just better to stay off of it. I mean, I find that if you get people in an individual conversation, which is why I kind of do the show like this, is that you get to learn more and you get to kind of talk it out. And like it's hard, especially with tweeting, it's a little bit the characters that are a little bit too long. But I'm like, I've seen spaces where people have kind of, and that's still difficult because there's a disconnect. You don't see a person's face on Twitter spaces, and anybody can control the room unless you had a moderator on things. But I'm like, if one actually goes together well, like Dane Cook, if you ever know, he's an actor, you know who he is. He does some Twitter spaces that are like pretty political, but he has like both sides come in and like talk about it. I'm like, well, this is interesting because nobody's cutting each other off. You get the full time to say what you want. And then people just go do this back and forth. And it's not like some of those people even end up following each other. So it's like not like it just needs to be like slam the door in their face and walk away. And I'm like, I think that's really easy to do. I think the issue where I had at a time with the left was like this woke movement part things. There's things I agree with, but I also agree with like in some aspects, like, dude, when I'm learning about the 60s and 70s, and I don't side with left or right, but you hear about the horrible things of looking for communists and the way that they would interrogate people with LSD and mind control people and using MK Ultra and all this, you want to get mad and you want to attack. And I'm like, well, you got to process that information. And a lot of people aren't processing that. They hear one whole about attack on this side or that, and then they run out into the world and start screaming at everybody. I'm like, hang on, let's figure out what this is. Let's calm down. And let's find a rational way to tackle the solution or tackle this problem and get real change going. I don't think that's crazy to think.
No, no, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not. And I mean, Twitter is just like kind of one thing. It's supplementary to many other things. That's the way I see it. But it definitely adds something. And I follow all kinds of people and vice versa. And and on Facebook too. I mean, I have Trump supporters, among my Facebook friends. I mean, I didn't go out seeking them, but they're people I grew up with, my own family. so, so I'm exposed to all points of view, and sometimes I don't interact. Sometimes I just, oh right, that's how they're conceptualizing it, and I move on. I don't always engage, but I still take it in. I only engage where I think it's productive. Maybe sometimes if it's just a chance of it being productive or whatever. But I think social media really adds something. They don't, kind of replace a lot of other things like this or, many other kinds of interaction. But it's, you know, they're all complementary to each other if you're in control of them in a certain kind of way.
Do you think it's been
You do have to be in control of them.
Do you think it's been easier to be able to talk about Marxism a little bit more with the access of social media? I find that like you get a lot of viewpoints sometimes that are outside of your own United States or anything that you could be confined into. And once you start kind of, like I said, understanding Islam, just even saying that people go, what? Like people listening would just be shocked. But I'm like, go listen to the episode. Like the dude, he might have only talked some good parts about it, but when I was understanding the Ottoman Empire and realizing the idea of Christianity, and I'm not religious at all, so Christianity is I don't know what that means. It doesn't have any effect on me. And being able to understand another religion on the basis of where you look at this society has been profoundly Catholic or Christian, and you kind of understand like, okay, so I understand why it was demonized, but let's take out that brainwashing or erase whatever that preconceived notion is and be able to open up and access it a little bit more and understand it more. I think social media has done that.
Yeah, it's played a role in that, definitely. I think it's a good thing.
We got to
I
get over the
certainly
having a president that has to be a Christian man with a family. That's nuts to me. I don't understand why we still do that.
no, I don't know. At least like, there's one that wasn't white, but that's something. But yeah. But a lot of the rest of the world isn't like that, by the way. Um, there are a lot of presidents and prime ministers in the rest of the world that aren't male, that aren't white, that don't have children. In fact, we have a situation. where there's three parties in a coalition, and the two biggest ones rotate the office of prime minister, right? Um, and so, the one that's now there, who's going to be replaced by the other one in December, he's, yeah, white man with, married Catholic children. But the one replacing him, who was also previously prime minister, he's not. He's not white. He's not heterosexual. Doesn't have children. Um, he probably isn't a believer.
That's what scares me is like I look at some of these Hoover documents and like I said, I'm gonna keep relating things to the 60s and 70s because it's where I just found the most evidence of like, holy crap, what is going on? And it was like to look for an FBI agent to play themselves in a movie, he had to be no drug issues, no alcohol, no divorce, no separations, had to have no DUIs. And it's like basic stuff, I guess, for a resume. But even if you had a communist view, if you were holding hands with somebody that was a man or the same gender as you, that was noted as well, and you weren't allowed to play them on the screen. And it was just like you guys had like I get it from their standpoint, but then I look at it from like the lenses of today, and it's like you really went in the horrible direction, which would have been even scarier if that would have continued to like today's time. Like we wouldn't have known that all this was going on, but you saw how difficult it was. I mean, I think even the Yankee Doodle Dandy, there's evidence to prove that that person had viewpoints that were of like Cuba and a little bit more of this activist type stuff. And he did that to create the Yankee Doodle Dandy to get J. Edgar Hoover off of his back. I had a friend that wrote a book on it and looked through the documents of the FBI files and everything. And it's like, I don't know. That's his perspective, I guess, and the information he came across. There's might probably be another one out there I got to talk to and understand it more. But it's like you really saw the silencing of anything that was different. And that is a lot different than today, mostly because there's a lot more change than it was 40 years ago, 30 years ago. But the
Oh, the 1950s, it was so closed down. It was so closed down.
it's just the idea, though, that imagine if it stayed the same, as people, we stayed with the same conclusions, the same basis on everything. And we just wanted people to look exactly like us and be exactly like us. I'm like, that's the 9 to 5 worker. Like that's the thing for the capitalist system, basically, to just keep pumping and feeding the machine. It's like we were brainwashed to be that. I don't know. That's might be conspiracy. I don't think it's conspiracy.
Mm, yeah. But Europe is very different. And I mean, it's, capitalism still prevails, but it's very different from America. There are just many more perspectives in play, um, more of the time.
Would you recommend to people that are of a younger generation to travel and try and get that experience of another perspective?
Yeah, but find a way to do it where, you could interact more meaningfully. Like if you were doing it, maybe like do a series of podcasts, while you're at it, but like a way that you interact more meaningfully. This idea of just like getting a Euro and you walk into this city and you walk around and then, go into a bar and then you go into another city and you just walk around and see all the tourist attractions. I don't think that really gets you very far. I've known people from America that went to Europe, and it's just a list of places where they've been, you know. So, people that come maybe on a student exchange or to work or, so I recommend that people have the opportunity to, come to Europe or Africa or Asia, Latin America for that matter, to do it in a way where you can meaningfully interact, not just, you know, walk around, capital cities and swim in the sea or whatever. Swimming in the sea is nice, by the way, in Southern Europe. Um, but yeah, just a way to interact meaningfully with people.
What was the biggest revelation in your life, I would say? Like something that you just came across and kind of completely changed you for the better?
Um,
It's a big question.
yeah. Well, the biggest thing that happens, what I already told you, is like, moving to the left. But that didn't happen like in a sudden incident or anything. That just kind of came gradually. The second biggest thing that happened again is the world historical thing, and it happened kind of suddenly. It didn't change me or anybody else for the better, but was kind of the overturning of um, a movement from socialism to capitalism in Eastern Europe. That was a big shock to me. I mean, I saw it happening. I was in Eastern Europe a lot as it was happening, but still the rapidity of, these societies being turned upside down. It wasn't for the better. I mean, some things are for the better. I mean, the Berlin Wall coming down and this wall right in the middle of, when you're in East Berlin or West Berlin, you're always in half a city. I don't regret the wall came down. I think it's good that people can, travel more freely. Everybody can travel more freely, people from the West as well as the East, than they could before. But, there's been mass impoverishment, the creation of an oligarchy, um, all kinds of ethnic tensions among people that, live peacefully together. The current war in Ukraine is, just one more bit of the chaos that resulted from all of that. Um, and but that was the two biggest things that happened in my life was, coming to the left myself, and then seeing this turned about, this counter revolution, really, that I never expected to see. I saw from the time I became left, especially from the time I became um, a Marxist. I saw the world as moving in however long and complicated and difficult a way from capitalism to socialism. And then here, suddenly, within, the space of a few short years, in a significant part of the world, it went the opposite way. So I had to really, that was a real challenge to me to think through, and to live through. And a big challenge for a lot of the people that, didn't become oligarchs, to live through.
Is there a halt in progress? Like, do you think that we would probably be farther ahead if there was another thing at the forefront? Like, if it wasn't a capitalist system or if it wasn't this, you think we'd be way farther than where we're at now?
I think the only way to survive is socialism. I think the whole planetary emergency that we're in, I don't think it can be solved under capitalism, because the profit motive is too dominant, and like what the imperatives of ecology go against the trajectory of capitalism. I think there can be some reforms. I don't have a lot of hope for what's happening in COP27 this week. I think even, within their narrow boundaries, they're going to make pledges that they're going to break. But even those pledges wouldn't sort out the real planetary emergency. I think that there once was a phrase, socialism or barbarism.
Yeah.
I think now it's socialism or extinction. I think it's the only way to survive. Now, what are the forces that can make that happen? We're too weak. Those of us that believe that we're too weak to make that happen. Gramsci once spoke about, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. So I tend to be very pessimistic intellectually looking at it, but I still have kind of determination and hope just to, what can I do? I can just make the case. I'm relatively powerless, but I'm not totally powerless. And that's what I can do. But will it be enough that, the number of people in the world who think the way I do can make what needs to happen happen? Hard to see.
I don't think we think that different. I think we think a little bit probably same. We probably have different strong viewpoints on some things. I'm more like, uh, kind of like, I'm going to stay out of that one when it comes to certain things. But obviously, I have strong convictions on some things. Mostly when it comes to, honestly, it's just treating people with respect. You treat people with respect, I give you respect back. I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. And sometimes people don't really follow that. And that's my
But can
only,
you treat everybody with equal respect?
do
Do you
I?
respect Trump?
I have never met the man. I'd have to meet him.
Well, I mean, as a public figure, not you don't have to meet him in person. Do you respect him?
Is he considered a public figure?
Yes, he is.
I'm sorry. I don't, like I said, I've been stuck in the 60s and
He
70s.
is a public figure.
I don't know. I don't watch TV. What do you want from me?
Okay. Well,
I don't
do you
consider
respect J. Edgar Hoover? Looking back,
uh like I would have to meet him to try and understand his viewpoint. I've talked to both sides, people that are fans of his and him being a purist. like the whole notion of being, against homosexuals or against communists without even, taking the chance to understand them. But I mean, that would be like asking me would I want to meet JFK or what. I don't admire JFK either. I think he said some pretty good stuff, but I'm not 100%. I don't know the man. I gotta meet the guy to be able to make my own decisions. I don't trust news sources. I don't trust that. I don't know what Biden's like unless I've met Biden either.
I don't respect Biden.
You don't respect Biden?
No,
Okay. Is it because he forgets a lot? I forget some things.
I don't respect Trump either. I mean,
I'm with you on that.
I think
So
Biden is after. I think the Democrats are actually worse in foreign policy than, of course, Trump and his foreign policy is all over the place.
I don't respect what's his name. Oh God, I'm gonna blank on the mayor of New York. What's his Blasio? He lost $950 million to a fund in mental health. I want to see his damn receipts. Where
I
did
didn't know that. I
where'd
didn't
you
know about that.
where'd you
Yeah,
lose nine? It was a fund given to him, $950 million for a fund specifically for mental health, and he lost it. You don't know where it is.
I
And I'm
didn't
just
understand that.
That's what I'm saying. I like that's what I don't respect is because I know somebody's using the money for something. I don't know where it's going. It's like that in every aspect. And that's the stuff I don't get. I don't like people getting cheated out of something that's rightfully supposed to be for them. Like when people donate, I have a problem with a charity using those donations for themselves or
So
giving
you
it
don't
to
respect people that do that.
that's belittling someone. It's not treating them with respect back.
Okay.
But I still have to meet the individual too. I'd have to meet Blasio and just stare at him and say, did you get a hot tub or something? I don't know. Like I said, I got trying my best to talk to as many people as I can to understand, this thing as well too. But I think, I mean, have you ever been told that you were supposed to hate somebody and then you end up meeting that person or knowing that person and end up not believing what people have told you before? We all have bad interactions with people.
Maybe. I mean, I've lived a long time, so I've experienced most things. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but well, I mean, yeah, I can. I mean, the whole world I grew up with, the world I described to you, I was, told I should hate communists. Communists were the enemy, and then I met them, and I became one. So yeah, on a big scale, yeah,
Did you ever meet,
definitely.
you said you meet JFK. Did you ever meet Hoover?
No, I never met Hoover.
Would you want to meet him?
Maybe,
You probably smell sulfur, right?
yeah, but if I if I had some kind of confrontation, I wouldn't shy away from it if I thought there was some point to it, even to explore.
This is just a hypothetical, but I mean, if there was time travel, I would really like to know what that person was like in their public life compared to what we know about them doing in their private scenarios. Like even Lyndon Johnson, he was not the best. The Secret Service didn't like him. He would pee on their shoes and things of that sort. And I want to know that like what the experience was like to meet that person because I think there's some people in history that obviously get glorified or written down in a certain way, but then the people that might be labeled the horrible or the evil ones might actually not be necessarily like that. Like Timothy Leary gets blackballed, but I've talked to defenders and people that hate him, and it's just like it makes it a complicated situation, especially when you're looking from a historical standpoint to try and figure out who this character was, what did he do. You can look at a journal, but I mean, even then, it's like you're only looking at what this person's thoughts might be, not the essence of who the character of the being is.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show. I know we kind of went all over the place, but is there a place where people can find your links?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I use my own name, not as some kind of pseudonym. Um, I have just if they Google my name, they'll find various publications. I'm very findable because I'm an author. Um, so yeah, I'm very easy to find.
Well, I'm going to link all your links in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode. Out of the blank.